I love driving through wine country and seeing row after row of green, each vine rooting itself in the earth and reaching up to the sun to grow. I'm struck by how essential the trellis is to the vine. You never see a vine growing wild on the ground. It always has a support structure underneath it. And I can't help but think of Jesus' teaching. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. The soul of a disciple of Jesus is like a branch in a vine, and we too need a trellis in order to grow. In the Christian tradition, this is called a rule of life. Over the last 6 sessions, we've laid out a vision of apprenticeship to Jesus. Now we're ready to shift gears and make a plan to turn that vision into a reality. Transformation is possible, but it's not inevitable. It won't just happen. We need a plan. Pete Scazzero of Emotionally Healthy Discipleship has said, nurturing a growing spirituality with depth in our present-day culture will require a thoughtful, conscious, intentional plan for our spiritual lives. We all have a plan for the things we most value. Most of us have a plan for our money, or what we call a budget. We have a plan for our time, or what we call a schedule. Many of us have a plan for our career, or summer vacation, or our diet or exercise routine, but not for our apprenticeship to Jesus. I've been around soccer moms with more of a plan for their kids' pathway to professional sports than for their discipleship to Jesus. The question is, how do we make a plan to be spiritually formed? Let me introduce you to the answer the first followers of Jesus came up with. They called it a rule of life. A rule of life is a schedule and a set of practices and relational rhythms that create space for us to be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. It's an intentional plan to slow down and simplify our life around being spiritually formed by Jesus. Rule of life is ancient language, so it can sound strange or even off-putting to our modern ears. But notice, it's rule of life, singular, not rules for life, plural. The original Latin word used by our spiritual ancestors was regula, where we get English words like regular and regulation, as well as rule and ruler, because it literally means a straight piece of wood. Some scholars believe it was the word used in the ancient Mediterranean for a trellis in a vineyard. In John 15, Jesus gave his most famous teaching on spiritual formation. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Early Christian teachers picked up on Jesus' metaphor and followed it to its logical conclusion. For a vine to bear much fruit, what does it need? A trellis, a support structure to lift it up off the ground, guide it in the desired direction, and guard it from damage, disease, and dangerous predators. In the same way, to abide in the vine and bear much fruit, apprentices of Jesus need a trellis, a support structure, to guard and guide their lives into transformation. A rule of life is exactly that, a trellis. It's a way to schedule into our daily life practices and relational rhythms that align our time and our habits to our deepest desires, to be with Jesus and become like him. The motivation behind a rule isn't duty, it's desire. Think of the way an athlete disciplines themselves with daily drills, or a musician with daily practice. It's all in service of a deeper desire. They know we have to connect our desires to daily disciplines if we want to see them become a reality. For apprentices of Jesus, a rule of life is made up of daily practices, like beginning your day in prayer and the reading of Scripture. Weekly practices, like keeping Sabbath and gathering with community. And monthly practices, like serving the poor and preaching the gospel. It's all the practices we intentionally, repeatedly do to offer our lives up to God for transformation. Put another way, a rule of life is an intentional plan for our spiritual formation. And in the chaos of modern life, with all its hurry and digital distraction and cross pressures, we need a rule more than ever before. It's an ancient idea whose time has come again. You may love this concept of a rule of life, or you may hate it, especially if you're a more spontaneous and fun-loving personality, or if you come out of a legalistic religious background and are wary of any talk of rules. But here's the thing, you already have a rule of life, whether it's written or unwritten, conscious or subconscious, wise or foolish, based on long-term vision or short-term instant gratification, moving you toward your desired destination or sabotaging your best intentions. Even if you have never heard the phrase rule of life until 3 minutes ago, you have one. We all do. We have a way in which we live, a morning routine, a typical workday, a network of relationships, a budget, things we spend our time on, and more. The question is not, do you have a rule of life? It's, do you know what your rule of life is? And is it giving you the life you most deeply desire? Is it working for you or against you? Many of us feel far from God so much of the time, always in a hurry, stuck in our spiritual formation, still living in wounding from our past or dysfunctional patterns in our present. The problem is not that our rule of life isn't working. It's that it is. You and I are being formed, for better or worse, by the choice architecture of our lives, by all the habits and relationships and environments and decisions that fill our days, by our rule of life.
I discovered I had a rule of life, an unconscious rule of life, while I was working on this book, The TechWise Family. And it dawned on me, writing this book about technology and family life, that I had an absolutely ironclad practice every single day of walking downstairs when I got up in the morning, and the first thing I did was look at my phone. That's what you do in the morning, right? Look at your phone. And, I'd be making tea, but even before the tea was finished, I'd let the glowing rectangle tell me whatever I needed to pay attention to. All the urgencies, all the outrages, all the demands, all the opportunities. And somehow I had the presence of mind one morning to think, this cannot possibly be the best way to start my day, because it would just instantly adrenalate me, So I thought, well, what could I do instead that would be kind of a sufficient counter-discipline to this habit of picking up my phone every day? And I thought, what I ought to do is go outside. So I decided that every day, after making my tea, there's one habit I'm not going to give up, which is tea first, but I'd take my tea outside and just walk out the front door, stand outside just for a few moments, and just experience whatever the day had for me before I turned to the glowing rectangle. And the first 2 weeks that I was trying this, every day was a ridiculous spiritual battle. Like, this is not a complicated thing to do. And yet every morning it was like this phone, I could almost sense like a voice calling to me from the little phone. Don't you need to check me? Don't you want to try me? And I'd have to resist and say, no, get behind me. I'm going outside first. 2 weeks in, I heard the voice, just like the days before, but something absolutely flipped. And instead of feeling temptation and allure, all I felt was revulsion and repulsion. Like, why would I invest in you this most beautiful first moment of my day rather than go out and be a creature in God's creation? And ever since I've done this, it is one of the most spiritually transformative things I've done with my life, probably in the last 10 years, maybe embarrassingly. Just step outdoors, whatever the weather is, wherever I am in the world. Sometimes I walk down flights and flights of stairs if I'm staying in a hotel or something, and just spend a moment being who I really am, which is a very small part of a very large world, rather than what I am on the screen, which is a very large part of a very small world. And it's been a gift to choose to be who I really am. And that's what our disciplines are for. That's what the real rule is for, is to choose to be who I know I am and want to be.
And now we're finally ready to craft a rule of life. Everything we do is invitational. We make recommendations, you make the decisions. But if you're ready to take the next step in your apprenticeship to Jesus and make an intentional plan for your spiritual formation, let me offer you a few tips. 1, start small. It's easy to get overexcited and overreach, but this is a strategy doomed to fail. When it comes to the spiritual life, as a general rule, start where you are, not where you should be. We must find God inside the contours of our ordinary life, not the life we used to have, or plan to have, or wish we had, but the life we actually have. So start wherever you are. For most of us, that means start small, with what psychologists call tiny habits, small, easy, joyful practices for life with God. Yes, a full hour every morning for prayer before you touch your phone is ideal. But if that's too big of a leap, start with 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, or 2 minutes. Start there. Secondly, think subtraction, not addition. Take out more than you put in. Less is more. It's tempting to write your rule as a list of things to do, and that's not all bad. But for most of us, it's just as important, if not more so, to make a list of what we're not going to do. A rule of life is not about doing more, but doing less. It's about ruthlessly eliminating hurry from your life. Third, take a balanced approach. You can plot the practices of Jesus along 4 axis points: disciplines you do alone and those you do in community, and disciplines of doing, like worship or feasting or service, and of not doing, like solitude, silence, or fasting. Naturally, you're going to be drawn to some practices and shy away from others. That's totally normal. Just make sure you design a rule that covers the whole range of your formation, not just your personality preferences. That said, take into account your personality and season of life. Work with your personality, not against it. If you're more introverted and intellectual, carve out plenty of time to read and reflect. If you're more extroverted and action-oriented, prioritize doing meaningful things with other people. Yes, we need a balanced approach, but some of us need way more of certain practices than others. Design a rule that is congruent with your personality and season of life. Just as our budget and schedule change through the various seasons of our life, our rule must as well. Fifth, there is no formation without repetition. Formation is slow and at times monotonous work. In the moment, it often doesn't feel like it's doing anything to us at all. It is, it's just slow. But over time, the practices have a cumulative effect upon our spiritual formation. It's like Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. In the moment, we just feel like we're waxing Mr. Miyagi's car or pounding nails into the dojo edition. But actually, we're becoming a karate master. In the moment, we just feel like we're beginning our day in prayer or practicing Sabbath or going to church. But actually, we're becoming like our master, Jesus. We just have to stay with the process and find joy in our ordinary life with God. Finally, do this in community. It's easy to think of crafting a rule of life as something I do. I write my rule. That's not all bad. To repeat, you already have a rule, so anything that brings more intentionality to your apprenticeship to Jesus is powerful. But historically, a rule of life was for a community. It was designed to hold a community together around shared rhythms of spiritual formation. And following a rule in community can change everything. There's something about starting the Sabbath, not just by yourself, but with a meal in community, makes the entire practice so much more fun. There's something about fasting on Fridays and knowing that you're doing it with your community. All of you are pooling the money you would have spent on food together to give to your local food bank. It's just better in community. So, as you make a rough draft this coming week of your first rule of life, if at all possible, do it in community. You could do it with one friend, or your small group, or table community, or women's Bible study, or even with your entire church. This will be a lot messier and take a lot longer to figure out, but that's okay. It will be worth it. In your guide is an example rule of life from Practicing the Way that I live by with our community, along with a few other samples from different people and different stages of life. But this does not need to feel overwhelming. Again, start small. Your rule may start as 2 or 3 simple practices, beginning your day by reading a psalm, getting coffee with a close friend once a week, and spending a few hours each Sunday in Sabbath rest. That's a beautiful start. You can always add practices in over time. Just take the next step.